Hey, welcome to the MasterYourMix podcast. My name is Mike Indivina, and thanks for hanging out with me today. Today, my guest is Marc Daniel Nelson, and if you're not familiar with Marc is a two-time Grammy and French Academy Award nominated mixing engineer, music producer, and creative director. He's worked with artists such as Colbie Caillat, Fleetwood Mac, Jason Mraz, and so many more. And this is a really fun conversation. We don't get super nerdy about all the technical gear side of things, although we do talk about that a little bit in this episode. But we focus a lot in this episode on the concept of just being a good person and being someone that people want to be in the room with, and how to build relationships so that you can ultimately build your career, grow your career, get into the right places at the right time. When you hear Marc's story, one of the threads that keeps coming up in it is the idea of meeting people who were open-minded and willing to help. And there are a lot of assholes in this industry. And Marc was very fortunate that he was able to avoid a lot of those. He found a lot of the right people to be mentors for him, show him the ropes, and to just help develop his skill set. You'll hear that he talks about how these people not only helped him with his audio skills, but they also helped him with just being a good person and people skills and all that kind of stuff. And that is such a massive part of this industry. And whether you're watching this or listening to this podcast to record yourself or to record other people or make a career out of this, even if you just want to perform with other people or play with other people, even if you're just at work and it's something completely unrelated to audio, you need to have these skills if you want to make a move in your life, if you want to see gains, and if you want to actually get promoted and find better clients or better work and get paid more and all that kind of stuff. So I just think that this was a really, really great episode. And I think that when you listen to his story, if you pay attention to the little details that keep coming up, you're going to learn a lot of great things that are going to help you get ahead in life. So yeah, I think you're going to find that part of the conversation really, really helpful. And we also get into a cool conversation about a brand new plugin that Marc has created with the help of Pulsar Modular. It is called the P455 MDN Sidecar. Bit of a mouthful. You'll hear me talk about that with Marc in this episode. But anyway, we get into the making of this plugin and what went into it. And you're going to find out that this was modeled after Marc's summing chain. And there are a lot of different components that went into it. I think you're going to find it really fascinating because even if you don't use this plugin or, don't plan on making plugins of your own, it's really interesting to hear the behind the scenes of what went into the making this plugin and how all of the little factors that make up this plugin impact the sound. And this is something you can certainly take and apply to your own workflow, your own equipment as well. So I think you're going to find that part of the conversation really interesting too. So, you know what? With that said, let's just jump right into it because this is a really fun one. This is my interview with Marc Daniel Nelson. Marc Daniel Nelson, thank you so much for being on the MasterYourMix podcast. How's it going, man?
How's it going? Thank you for having me, Mike.
Good. For people who might not be familiar with you, can you give us a little background on who you are, what you do, and ultimately how you got into what you're working on today?
Today, exactly today?
Sure. Let's go for it. Yeah.
Or today as in
the grander
now.
scheme. Yeah. Now in this past 5 years or so.
I'm a music producer, mixer, creative, leadership, goofball that likes to work in music and that dabbles in the movies and TV, and it's all connected. I don't know what else to say. It's so hard to
let's
so
go back
hard
to
to
the
talk
beginning.
about yourself.
Let's go back to the beginning then. How did you ultimately get into music? Were you just were you a musician yourself that just fell in love with the idea of playing and wanted to record your stuff, or what was that like?
Yeah, so I've told this story a lot. And I will probably say stuff that will be very repetitive if other people have heard random backlog stories of myself. But I think it's really critical to kind of explain that whole process so people kind of understand and get into it's always going to be back to working in your room, in your bedroom or whatever. So yeah, 14 years old, got into recording really early. In fact, I think I have it right here. This is probably
nice.
So this guy,
the old tape recorder.
This is the original Tascam 424. So I bought that very interesting. This is going to be a very long podcast, so buckle up. So essentially, I started playing guitar. I wanted to be the fifth Beatle kind of a thing. I loved the Beatles. I loved listening to the anthology. That's kind of how it all started. Sgt. Pepper and the anthology. Just the discussions in the studio and hearing them talking and then them taking takes. And then the quality was so great. So that's how I kind of got in. And I was a guitarist and I wanted to learn how to record. So I bought a reel-to-reel tape recorder at a school auction, like a county auction, all this old equipment being auctioned off. So I had like a really crappy mono reel-to-reel, some old tube mixers that were not worth anything. Nothing crazy, but enough for me to put together a really crappy recording studio. My dad always said, I didn't help you build a treehouse, so here's $200, you can build a studio in the basement. Because at that time, my friend Nathaniel and I were really like hands-on. We would build stuff like walls and stuff. So we knew how to like frame a wall. So we built a studio, like a really simple, small studio, tiny. And then along the way, this is way before any sort of computer digital stuff. There was, at the time, a cassette duplicator, 4-cassette duplicator recorder box that I got at this auction. And apparently it was worth $300-$400. I didn't know this, but it was worth a lot. And before Craigslist and Trading Post and all that stuff, there was a rag magazine that you could post, classified stuff in. So I posted it in and somebody bought it within a day. So I was able to like right away buy a 4-track Tascam, which is what this was. The same one, everything. Great. I still have it. It still works great. But that's how I got into recording bands in high school and really drove my parents crazy having random kids coming over, coming into the basement and stuff. Going into senior year and such, started working with a friend. His name was Phil Frechette, who was just one of the best songwriters I ever knew at my age because no one really knew a lot of songwriters. But he was one of those guys that just wrote a song every day. And it was really great. He was kind of like a Rob Thomas kind of thing. And his band was really great. And they went and recorded at much better studio at the time. That really got me in. So by the time I graduated high school, I knew I want to be a recording engineer. I want to get into this. So I went to Ohio. At the time, there wasn't a lot. There was zero real recording programs other than 2 or 3. Full Sail, recording workshop in Ohio, and the conservatory in Arizona. That was pretty much it. Nothing really other than that. And I didn't want to go to 4-year school at that time. So I went to Chillicothe, which I think is still a school recording workshop. I'm assuming it is. And it's, really dunky old town in Ohio. And they had 3 or 4 main recording spaces. And at the time, this is 99, 2000. Everything was analog or ADATs. And if you were good enough and you wanted to pay even more money, which they loved, you could take their advanced class, which would be Pro Tools, which would be, I think, version 5.1. If I remember, it was 5.1, and I always thought it was surround. It was connected, but I don't know. Probably wasn't. So, long story short, I barely made it through because I'm terrible at school. Barely made it through, goofed around, and came back to Indiana because I'm from Valparaiso, Indiana, originally, which is 28 miles southeast of Chicago downtown. And started applying to all these studios thinking I was going to get an instant assistant gig. This is 2000, so there were studios still working and there were still assistants being paid as staff, but it was starting to dry up for sure then. I think I sent out 100 cover letters and just internship requests, and nobody responded except for one, which was very odd because it was by far the best and biggest studio, which was the Chicago Recording Company. And at the time, I think they were the biggest studio in the Midwest, if not one of the biggest facilities in America. And really heavy-hitting, major projects. So yeah, I got an internship there. I remember it clear as day going in for the interview. Joe Sturm was the studio manager. I was a really snappy, cocky little kid that thought I was going to just take over the world. And I learned really quickly from all the other guys that worked there, all the way from staff engineers to assistants to night guys. It's not going to be easy. And in fact, you're going to have to like come out of the clouds, because reality is it doesn't work that easy. So it was just one of those things where it clicked really quickly. And there was a lot of really good people that I worked with at that studio that taught me so much about just like, it's not even about engineering as much as it was about how to behave, how to behave as an adult, how to like essentially just, like read a room and talk with and communicate with artists, and, know how to just kind of get, there was definitely a protocol system or code that was in the industry that you really wouldn't know unless you worked at a larger facility, studio, as a runner that would go into an assistant gig. So that's pretty much how I got into it.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's funny to hear you say that, like, they kind of forced you to come down from the clouds a little bit and, like, adapt to their way of doing things and make you realize you got to work hard. Because I do think that there are a lot of people, one of the problems that I have with a lot of these music schools is that they still encourage, or they still, give people that dream that, like, you're going to graduate, you're going to get a job, it's going to be easy. And
do they still do that?
I think a lot of them still will tell you that they, the success
it's so
rates
weird
are massive.
because they were doing that 24 years ago.
Yeah.
And there was nothing.
Totally.
When you left. They were just like, see you later.
Yeah.
And the only reason why I was able to get hired at CRC, other than just being a runner intern, was two reasons. One was there was this guy, his name was Tim Butler, who was the most like established post-production mixer in Chicago, if not in the country, like massively well-known. And he was a stickler. He looked like Stanley Kubrick, goofy looking guy, extremely sharp, but very odd. And he was like a super amazing, like psychologist in the room, which is why all these ad agencies wanted to work with him and stuff. This was non-music related. This was like jingles and like commercial mixes and stuff, which was all in the same building as the music rooms. And, so I started working under him, and he was the one that taught me all the psychology of like how to handle clients and stuff. But basically he started paying me to, like, at the time, pull all of his albums and put it in digital, convert it into iTunes, which is hilarious. But like making $13 an hour 24 years ago was pretty great, because I don't even think the assistants were making that at CRC for the music rooms. So that's how you fell into that, which ended up being a good enough way to make a living in the beginning. But what happened was, you had to wait. There's all these, interns and runners going through the process. And then there was like 3 or 4 guys kind of in line to get the next gig as an assistant engineer. That would be the dream job, essentially.
Yeah.
And, the thing was, at the time, it wasn't about the money. I was 19. Like, all I wanted to do was work. So like I would go in and I would work a ton of time with Tim Butler and whatever that was going on with his projects outside of the studio. And then to make things make sense, I would actually come in and attend these big, huge jingle music sessions, like unreal projects, just watching, 80 people record live. Big, high profile stuff like Disney and McDonald's and stuff. Because at the time, they would do all these big sessions with real players live on the floor. Full orchestra, rhythm section, brass, singers live. It was just amazing. So being able to, attend those sessions and really start wondering how the whole process was happening. But then what got into it was there was a night position. They called it it was essentially assisting, hip hop tracks, hip hop records, big records, but assisting. And at the time, not a lot of guys knew Pro Tools. So, and I didn't know Pro Tools as much as I thought I did, even though I took like a 6-week advanced course at school. I had no idea what even OS was or a desktop was or anything. I just totally faked my way through it and somehow was able to always have it open and arm one track. I tell you, if it wasn't hip hop because it was only one vocal at a time, I don't think I would have been completely fired in a second. But the point I was making though was, yeah, I mean, the idea of how long it took to get to that place, it could have been years. You know, there's so many, and the chances of even getting in as an intern was hard.
Absolutely.
And making it all happen so, like, I mean, the one thing that was always really critical for me to anytime I would like be asked to go talk at a school or something like that was knowing their placement program and how they handle their students after the fact. Because as you said, there's a lot of predatorial approach with pulling in people, and some of these schools, which I will not name their names, but they were offering, you know, associate degrees, which was able to be an affiliate to find ways for, you know, outside state funding and letting parents be like, oh, my son's getting an associate degree. I don't mind paying $50,000 to send him to school in Florida. That's all I'll say.
Yeah, totally.
So we already know. So like that happened a lot. And what caused problems with that was the guys and girls that went to these schools came out almost arrogant because they knew that they were putting so much into their education. So I remember starting with a handful of these guys as interns, and their arrogance, it's one thing to be confident. I mean, I was a maniac when I was 19. I was so cocky and like still am. But you know what I mean? Like I was trying to like fake everything I could just to make sure I could get in front of the right people, and then I will always learn how to like correctly do it, which I did. And I made many mistakes and you learn. But the thing that was hard was talking to these guys that were like $50,000, $60,000 in debt from going to these recording schools. And then they lasted like 2 months as interns because they're like, what do you mean I don't get to touch the console?
Yeah.
What do you mean I don't get to set up the U47? That's why I came here. That's why, I mean, I deserve to. I spent the money to get there. I mean, it's just really odd to think that's
Totally.
the approach.
Yeah.
But
Absolutely.
I mean, I could go for hours about that first year.
No, I believe it. Yeah, I remember like
real quickly, let me just say something that like bless my dear friend Mark Rubel, who passed away a few months ago, who was the main director and one of the main catalysts for Blackbird Academy. Him and John McBride has built such an incredible recording program to educate. And their placement is incredible. Like, if you are good and you are hardworking, you will get a placement out of that job, out of that.
That's amazing.
Education.
Yeah, that's important. Like those schools that actually do take the time to put in the effort to get their students in a studio, like that's huge. I remember going for a tour of Berkeley like 20 plus years ago when I was looking for an audio college, and I remember asking the guy, our tour guide, I was like, how many people like graduate this program get jobs in the industry? And he was like, straight up, if I tell you that answer, he's like, I can't answer.
You know what his answer is?
No, his answer was, Mike, I can't tell you because if I tell you, you won't come here. So
his answer, Mike, is I graduated last year.
Fair, yeah.
That was the thing I noticed at all these recording schools. They were like, the people teaching were like graduates from like a year before. And you're going, that's the only way they're getting jobs is making, you know, $8 an hour teaching kids how to record on ADATs and Mackie boards. I mean, it was just insane.
Well, moving on from that, one of the themes that I definitely know has been a big part of your career is that you've had a lot of mentors along the way. And it seems like once you got in, you started to work under a lot of great people who were able to pass on a lot to you. And I'm curious to know, like, you know, that seems to be, you know, still a lot of people say that's the best way to get into this industry is like find someone who's ahead of you and learn from them. What's your advice for finding a mentor and getting in the room with them? Like, because there are fewer positions available, and that, you know, the big people are getting people knocking on their door every day. So, what are the best ways for people to get into a studio and find those people?
I mean, honestly, we're in an era now where it's a lot easier to get kind of information on YouTube or wherever you're looking to get the information from. For me, I always would read the albums that I grew up loving and try to soak up as much information as I could and stick with it. When I started at CRC, there was my first mentor, who was Dennis Tusana, who was a phenomenal jazz engineer, still is, phenomenal jazz engineer in Chicago. And I flocked to him because he was a really nice guy. And, there was a lot of not nice guys at the studio that didn't want to like help and show and teach. And at the time, all I wanted to do was sponge it up. So he showed me a lot. And in fact, it was very interesting because it led me to a different phase in my life to understand quality control at a specific level. Because if I would have gone a completely different route, meaning I would have mentored under a heavy rock guy, because at the time, Chicago was on fire with rock. And I put a lot of attention to kind of like really hi-fi jazz kind of stuff, just because I thought it was harder to mix because it's just beautiful, huge sounding versus just like clamping everything down and rock and punchy. I loved that too, but I felt like it wasn't nearly as challenging. So just like learning through these guys, but any kind of person I reached out to, I wanted to be their best friend, which I probably drove absolutely crazy trying to just leech onto them because I didn't want to steal their work or job. I just wanted to learn anything I could about the right way of doing it. And the weirdest part was everyone had their own approach, which I thought was really cool. There was a handful of guys. I would read Tape Op one day. I remember hanging out. My parents had like a cabin, and I remember in the summer randomly, this is like 20 years ago, hanging out, reading a Tape Op. And there was an article about Mike Hagler, who engineered Summer Teeth, Wilco's Summer Teeth. And Wilco's a huge band in Chicago, and that was a big band I liked really well. And they did a lot of stuff at CRC too. And I knew a handful of people that worked on a handful of their albums. But just reading about this Mike Hagler guy, I was so passionate about learning what his approach was, because he was an early Pro Tools guy in the 90s. And so I ended up working with him. I hired him to mix a couple tracks and hanging out with him for a bit to learn his process. And, you just kind of hang out with these guys and you learn. And if they let you hang around, then, you're okay. And it was like a couple visits and that's all it was. And then I moved on to another guy. But it was always just kind of shadowing under people to learn how to like just learn or be part of the story or just experience it. And, I went to film school about 2 years after I worked at CRC for film. I went to film school for film. Who would have thought? And I got my bachelor's in directing and editing, my minor in editing. And it was really great, but my heart was still in music. And at the time I was working at a studio to pay, my expenses, life and everything. I managed this other smaller studio. It was not nearly as gorgeous and big as CRC, but it was a studio. It was multi-track. It was a DAW, really good vintage microphones. And it was a $40 an hour studio versus a $125 an hour studio. But it was great. And, I mentored at that time with two guys. One was the guy who owned the studio that showed me his approach, which he was kind of like this kind of folky, songwriting folky kind of guy. And then my life mentor, who kind of taught me every aspect of my life, who was this still a great guy, Dave Abshire, that was like the Forrest Gump of everything. He did everything. I mean, you couldn't even list all the stuff he's done because it's just so insane. Like he's an A&R guy, and then he was a world championship car painter guy. And then he's like the only guy that was hired by John DeLorean paint the DeLorean red. It was so odd. So he has so many insane stories, but the thing that he was really good at was, again, people skills and how to talk to people and how to get around people and he's just incredibly good at like teaching that. And I was with him for like 6 years, just working on his album, because he also was a songwriter and he had a really nice studio at his house. And we would just produce the same concept album for like freaking 5 or 6 years. It was insane how long it took. But what that did was it allowed me to grow my craft slowly to understand what it was. By the time it was done, he wanted to maybe go and have someone, because we tried other mixers and I was a producer and I was going to mix it, but there was an option to have somebody better do it. We wanted that to happen. So long story short, I went and reached out to Doug Sax, who, if the listeners don't know who Doug Sax is, because he passed away in 2015, he's the grandfather of mastering. He has done everything, and he was amazing at it too. He was absolutely the king of all kings. And his studio was called the Mastering Lab. And I wanted him to master the album, because at first I was going to mix it, and then we were talking about somebody else, but let's get somebody to master it. So I flew out to LA on advice from Dave. This is after, 6 years of working professionally. I already am in film school, work at a studio, already, kind of locked into my universe, producing this album. To pitch mastering. Who goes across the country with an album to meet somebody about mastering? I mean, that's so ridiculous now. But since he was such a huge deal and he did all the Pink Floyd records and everything that I loved, I got to meet this guy. And he was so nice on the phone, which is something that like I still find incredibly thrilling, is meeting the people that like made a difference, and they're like on the phone wanting to talk to you until you're done talking, kind of a thing. You know what I mean? I find that's so exciting to me. So I was so gravitated toward that. And I came out to LA just for a weekend to meet him and talk. And he's like, who's mixing this album? I said, well, I was supposed to, because we can't really afford anyone if you're mastering it. He's like, Bill Schnee should mix this album. And I said, yeah, exactly. That's what I was thinking. And of course, at that time, my first album I ever bought, CD, was Bodyguard, which Bill did. Whitney Houston. He found Huey Lewis, which was my first cassette. There was just like all these big things growing up. He was the engineer, probably the only engineer that ever worked with all of the Beatles after they broke up. There was a lot of like big things in my life of Bill. Not only was he had all these great things, but he was also historically the best of the best, and like the passion of gear and microphones. And I knew all this. So when Doug said that, I'm just like, yeah, okay, that's crazy, but I wish, kind of a thing. And long story short, I was driving back to LA and Bill called me, which was so odd to me. And I still find it so strange. He's like, hi there, where are you at? Like, I don't know, because I was so young. I didn't know LA or anything at the time. And he's like, okay, go here and meet me at my studio. Okay, like this is insane. The weirdest part was about being organized. And I think the reason why this happened was because when I came to Doug, I had a binder, which is something Dave taught me about being hyperly organized. And your first impression is massive when you're meeting new people, because that's all you get is your first impression. And so I had this beautiful binder, and it was a 16-track concept album, and every page had exact track layouts and everything that you needed. So if you're just presenting the album, which is kind of archaic now, but like in reality, it's a really good way for anyone to kind of pitch something, almost like a movie pitch or something. You have a pitch deck you can just look at and go, okay, I get what's happening here. Here's the CD. Let me listen to it. Okay, I can do this. Because usually when you're being hired as a mixer or whatever, someone's like, well, how much do you charge? And you're like, can I hear the song? Because if it's 8 tracks and a really great song, it's going to be easy to mix and quick. If it's 200 tracks and messy and not a great song, it's going to be really hard. So like presenting stuff like that is so critical. And I think that was a huge thing, because somehow, and I still don't know how, I'm trying to figure this out, because Bill had the binder, or he didn't have the binder, because he called me the same day. And Ojai is like an hour and a half north of LA here. So like I had to come back down. It was just a weird thing. So I ended up meeting him at his studio and talking to him for like an hour. And when I was showing up, Bill had this like the best #1 studio in LA, sonically. It was incredible. It's still there. It's Larrabee. Manny Marroquin owns the building now, and the studio's still there, but it's just different. The console's not there, and Bill's not there, which was 90% of the magic, if not all. Get there, and Abe Laboriel Jr. was packing up his drum set. And at the time, being a huge Paul McCartney fan, I was just like, what is happening? And there was something where he was packing up, and they had cartage, which is, people don't know what cartage is. It's just essentially, instrument movers that move stuff from studio to studio at a time. And he had his drum set being packed up then. And Bill said bye, and then he met him right out in front of his studio. We went inside. I'm looking at the kit. I'm looking at the microphones. He has EMT or Elam 251s on the overheads, like real Elams, which at the time I knew Bill had a soft spot for Telefunkens. And this is before, or right when Tony Fishman was having kind of his launch of Telefunken in Connecticut. And so there was a little difference between, the original Telefunken and the modern, US take of it. And me being silly, when I was young, I had a Telefunken logo tattooed on the back of my arm because I always thought the Telefunken brand was kind of like the catalyst of high audio, tubes, amplifiers. It was kind of like the start of high audio. So and the Telefunken 251 is like historically the most famous microphone, like the best microphone ever. They go for 50 grand, 60 grand right now. And I knew Bill had like 20 of them because he's crazy. I mean, there was videos of him in the 80s with Jeff Porcaro, and he had like 12 on a drum set, including all the toms and stuff. I think it was a flex, but it sounded incredible.
It's a good flex.
So I remember getting there and seeing that and like talking to him, and I showed him my tattoo as a goofball gesture. And I think he liked that. I don't know. He wanted to mix the album, which I thought was incredible. But I told him, I said, we can't afford you if we're going to use Doug to master. And he's like, well, go back to Chicago and find out what you guys can do, and we'll make it happen, and call me. And that's what happened. We spent like an hour talking. He told me everything. He showed me way before there was Beatles, like Beatles stems out on the market anywhere. He had Sgt. Pepper because of the stuff he did with Ringo or something. He had this, and he played that, and it was just like my brain blew.
He wined and dined you.
Yeah. And I'm like, how do I move to LA tomorrow? If it's like impossible to do. But so I went back to Chicago and I talked to Dave. And I think this is a important story to understand, like, because building into like relationships is all about the insides of the process versus I met this guy, I did this, I sat here, he told me to do that. Dave is like, what do you think he would do it for? And I'm like, well, here's his probably normal rate. And we probably can't even pay that entirely for an album. And he goes, well, ask him if he would do it for a little more than his one per song rate for the whole album. I'm like, I can't do that. I can't do that. There's no way. And I ended up doing it. And of course, Bill's like, great, sounds great. Send me the tracks. And that was it. He mixed the album. Everything was great. Sounded unbelievable. Essentially, I had my ref mixes, which was a really good like example of learning to just like match and improve. I think that's a Michael Brower term, where you get like a reference from a producer and you're not really wanting to be asked to just change it. They just want to make it sound very similar, but better, bigger, more space around the instruments, but essentially that ref mix, which you think is like, that doesn't sound very fun. But for me, that's like the challenge of how can I get it like this, but just better? And that's what Bill was doing to my mixes. And I was just fascinated because I'm like, I know he's using samples. I know he's using incredibly good reverb. I know he's using console, mix summing through and analog compression, but how is he getting this amount of low end on my tracks that I physically can't do myself? So we had a recall weekend planned after the summer, after he mixed it back in LA. And then we were going to go to mastering. And we spent a day at the studio, or two, I think it was 2 days, doing full recalls on the album with Bill and his assistant, and just kind of experimenting and sitting there. And like, I was just asking him how to change stuff. And he was so responsive to that, which I was so drawn to with Bill. He was so good at like listening to my vision, which I thought was crazy because here's a guy with hundreds and hundreds of gold albums and tons of Grammys and like just honored as like one of the best in the world that's worked with everyone. And like, he's listening to me say, maybe we should back that delay off a little bit. And he would do it. And I was just so drawn to that. And I was so impressed by that like by the time we went up to Ojai for mastering, I was just like, how on earth can I change my life, uproot my life and move from Chicago all the way to LA and work for this man and learn anything I can and listen to anything he says and just be happy.
I love that.
So that was kind of how it started. We went to master. I met my really good friend now, one of my best friends, Eric Boulanger, who runs the bakery, who worked under Doug Sachs. And he was the closest to my age. He was younger than me, like 6 years younger, but he was young. And I go, okay, here's a guy that's working for Bill's best buddy. He's close to my age. Okay, so I think I have a friend in LA now. I remember thinking this. And so I'm like, okay. I mean, I had a couple friends. A friend that was a big actor. I had a good buddy that lived in LA that I would come and visit that I knew. And I had some other buddies that lived in LA. And I convinced my best friend to move with me to LA. In my head, I'm thinking all this through this weekend, going, how am I going to be able to do this? So then after we mastered, I just went to Bill and I said, I want to come work for you and just shadow under you and be your protege. And he goes, great, let me know when you get here. It was like so blunt. And like, I just remember being like, wait, no. Because it wasn't even like, wait, how much am I getting paid? It was nothing like that.
Yeah.
I didn't care about that. It was more like, wait, I'm going to have to move my life to Los Angeles.
Yeah, you didn't expect his answer. Yeah.
You know, I thought he was going to say yes because I talked to Dave about it that night because Dave went out to dinner with Doug and Doug's wife, Phyllis. I think they were all talking anyways. I don't know. But the point I was making was, I think there was something cooking there because I asked Dave, I said, what's the chances? If I ask him, because I didn't want to be denied. You know, you try so hard and there's these peak moments in your life. I'm just getting excited now because I'm really thinking about it. Like, that was such an arc in my life that if Bill said no, I would have gone completely different route. I would move to Nashville or something, or who knows? I would have gone head over into film and been a film editor the rest of my life. I don't know. But Bill's saying, great, let me know when you get here. And that's all I needed to just say. I went home. I called my parents. I said, I'm moving to Los Angeles. I have a job, but I don't know if I'm getting paid or not. My parents are like, what? I'm like, just trust me. Just trust me. And so, yeah, packed up. I convinced my best friend who just recently got divorced and lived in Philadelphia to move with me to LA. We had this option to move to LA and live in this art share downtown LA with a bunch of crazy artists. And we did it. And that's where it started. And I would show up at Bill's every morning and sit with him in his control room and walk outside when he took his calls and went to lunches when he had visitors and clients. And I did not leave his side as long as I could. He would come in on Sundays and mix, Saturdays and mix, and I would sit with him and ask him, drill him, and watch. Because what I learned was everything I was taught was wrong. But not wrong like don't do it anymore, but wrong like this is the right way. You can continue doing the other way that you like, but this will give you better results. But don't forget the other way. It was a really interesting process.
Interesting.
And I drove Bill's assistant crazy, Darius, because Darius is like, who is this kid that's just attached to Bill? And like, there was times I would go and have dinner with him and some friends or something that I'd have to sneak around. It was just a weird thing. But the point was, it was incredible. And I learned so much. I went to all the mastering sessions with Doug and Bernie Grumman, and Robert Hadley did stuff in Hollywood at the Mastering Lab at the time. And it was just an incredibly good way to learn the LA process, learning and meeting all the real A-list players, learning microphone technique, learning how to stop talking, learning everything, reverbs, time, space, pre-delay, everything was just this crash course of a year. It was so unbelievably important in my life. And I've said this so many times that I owe my entire career to Bill, 1,000,000%. And just because here's a guy that did so many big records, and he's hanging out with this young 26-year-old goofball kid that just is a leech. And like, all I knew was that's all I wanted. I would go home at night. I remember, because I lived downtown LA, and at the time, downtown LA was not safe. And I would go to the gas station and get one of those giant Foster keg cans. It was like, 3 beers in a can. Huge.
Yeah.
And I'd go and I would just go in and I would listen to albums that Schnee had. And at the time, iTunes was just strong enough that you could kind of go back. And I knew plenty of it because I would always ask Bill, what albums are you most proud about? So I can go listen. And so I started really listening, which was a huge part of what he taught and Doug taught, which was critical listening.
Yeah.
And start understanding that. And as we just spent an hour talking about mentorship, but that's so critical to find a person. And it doesn't mean you latch them because they're famous or you latch to them because they worked on famous albums, but just vibing with the person. Like Bill liked food. He liked to go to lunch and dinner, and he liked to talk about like different places to eat. And I found that fascinating. Like that was such a culture that I wasn't used to, even though coming from Chicago, that's what we do is eat and stuff.
Yeah.
But like, it was so important to learn. And I don't know.
Yeah.
What happened was I got a call to come back to Chicago and build a studio with a friend, an old friend I knew back home. And I said, this is another one of those like splits in the road. I could stay in LA. I can continue doing what I'm doing with Bill. I could start freelancing at other big studios in LA and start my career and do it. Or I can go back to Chicago and build my own studio and start again from scratch, the way it needs to be, and see. And of course, at that time, I was really homesick. My uncle was, just passed away. My parents I missed, and I was about ready to start dating this girl that I ended up dating on and off for many years. And so I thought, okay, I think it's time. I can go back and apply everything I learned over the last year on new stuff. So I ended up building this studio called The Alley from scratch with my partner, Chad Clifford, who's this great guy that I always looked up to growing up because he was a great, great musician, singer. And that was kind of where it led. But what that honestly led me to do was be able to, on my own time, with my own studio, because there's a lot of downtime owning a studio, try everything out. And I started making really good relationships with Guitar Center, GC Pro and stuff, where I was able to literally just try any piece of gear ever. And I had 6-7 years of that before I moved back to LA. And honestly, it was so critical to do that, almost equal to like the internship.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time there wasn't like, there was YouTube and stuff, but it was very, very, very limited. And there was no one, like Warren didn't have his channel Produce Like a Pro yet or anything like that. And for me, I loved reading stories about engineers in the studio, and like we're all that way, right, Mike?
Of course.
I mean,
that's why we do this, right? That's why
for like
we're
40 minutes
right?
about the passion.
But I love that. I think that that's so, like, it's such an important thing to talk about. And like, yeah, I'm sure there's some people listening to this that are like, get to the technical stuff or whatever. But it's like, no, this is actually critical information for people to know, because like it kind of reminded, like, as you were telling that story, it seems like all of the people in your life have had this kind of characteristic to them where like they've been open and willing to help people and all that. And it reminded me of like the second date I went on with my wife. Like we went to this like seedy bar in Toronto, and it's like the type of place where like everything is like graffiti everywhere. And I remember like on our table, someone had like scribbled on the table, and it said like the 2 rules of life. Number 1, don't be a dick. Number 2, be cool. And we're like, that is fucking brilliant. That is exactly the way people should live.
That's all it takes.
And it seems like everyone that you've talked about in your story, all the people that you've worked with, all the people you've encountered, they've had those personalities, they've had those traits. And, that's part of the reason why these people have had so much success, and why you've had success with it as well, because you could tell that you're like, if you treat people with respect, they're going to want to work with you. They're going to want to be in the room with you, and you can all grow and learn together.
It's so weird because I grew up at a studio at 19. And like I said, I was a whippersnapper, but like I had a lot of hate. There was a lot, and I don't want to go back on talking who's who, but the people that know, they were not nice. There was a lot of jackasses, and that hurt. Mm-hmm. And it still hurts thinking about it, because like I'm way more successful than they are, and I'm to this day like all about helping people and trying, because based off of my experiences when I was 19 or 20, people just hitting you and kicking you when you're down and trying to like climb above you. It's just so many shysters out there that the one few people that are out there that are good people that are there to help, you kind of like don't believe it. And then you just flock to that more than anything. And then the talent kind of comes out of that, which kind of took me into how I got into like the video masterclass stuff with Warren and stuff. Is I just enjoy sharing whatever my passions are with other people. And some reason people like that. I think it's such a great community to be able to not be a dick in, if you know what I mean. It's just crazy to think all the people that I've met in the last 24 years that are successful, there are some absolute miserable, horrible people. And then there are just people that you just stand and just be like, how is this real? Like, how on earth is this person such a good person and wanting to spend time talking to me and be so successful at the same time? I mean, I get so excited about that stuff. Like every time I talk to John McBride on the phone, which I do a lot, and we're buddies and we just get excited. Every time I talk to him, I'm in my head going, this guy he has an empire in Nashville. Blackbird is such a success, and he gets so excited talking, and we goof around on the phone, and I just get so excited talking to people like that because they've had such an experience in life. And I don't know, I get in these weird moments of being like, why? Same as like Dave Pensado, same as just talked to Paula Salvatore yesterday, who ran Capitol for 30 years. And she's just an unbelievable good person that just wants to help. Everyone's just, I don't know. I have this thing in life where I feel like it sounds really sappy. And yeah, maybe we should be talking about compression and multiband and how to get the perfect snare sound. But I can tell you, you wrap yourself around really good people, the right good people, you will learn anything you ever need to know and more. But I think the excite part about my career and everything is just the community of friendship. And it's usually tied to the people that like, it's not like I'm like drop dead passionate about finding people that are successful, but usually when you're meeting people that are talented and successful, that are good people, it's just extremely special and you have to latch to that. So yeah, Don't be a dick, because I can assure you, Mike, there will not be a future. There's a lot of things that people forget, that there's optics, and there's a lot of people that don't look 10 feet in front of them, or they had this superstar 5-year killer streak at success. But that's going to wrap itself up. It does to everyone. And whatever you do at that point is what you're going to do for the next 5 years. And if you were a jerk or a jackass to many people, they will know and they will talk about it. And then you're in big shit. So yeah, always be a good person. Always try to help. I don't know. There's a lot of people in the beginning. I think I've done, probably 75 videos over the last 5 years or so with Warren and other outfits. And there's always all these people going, why are you doing that? Like, why are you sharing all the secrets that they were taught to you? And I'm like, because they were taught to me. Bill taught me. I didn't pay him. He didn't ask me to pay him to teach. He gave me these secrets because he thought this is how you should do it. Same as Ken Caillat, same as all these other people in my life. They are sharing secrets because that's what you do in life. You help each other. Passion. So I don't know. I'm in this like hyper mode because this week was full of really good chats with some really amazing people, and they're all doing really great things. And I think it's important to know that like the industry is changing. AI is scary and fun at the same time, and everyone's kind of watching what's happening in the world. And I think in the music side, not to get too veer off, but like in the music production side of things, we get so used to being in our own world. Now, as a home studio guy, like you're in your bedroom, I'm in my bedroom. We're in our little workspace. That's what we do. I mean, you have your life outside of what you do. And then when you're working, you're working. It used to be such a community. And, Pensado always talks about like missing that, like when he would work out of Larrabee, all the doors would be open. Everyone would go in 5 different rooms and hang out.
Yeah.
I used to work at the Village with Ken Caillat, and it was still is a very same approach, where 2 years there, everyone in the room, everyone had their own room. The doors were open. I used to go down and hang out with Ed Cherney every day.
That's
Every
awesome.
day I would sit with him and talk to him for about 15, 20 minutes before I left, because traffic in LA was awful. And he would always stay late, and I would stay a little late to beat the traffic, and I would just chat. And we don't get that as much anymore because we're all in our bedrooms and stuff. COVID obviously had a lot to do with that. And it's just easier to do that. Look at Atticus. I
didn't even notice that he was there, and then all of a sudden he started stretching. For people who are listening, there's a giant dog in the background. Yeah.
So he's in the plugin.
Yeah, I did see that. Yeah, maybe we can talk about that then, because that's maybe another transition there. But you recently released a new plugin with Pulsar Modular. It's the P450 455 MDN sidecar. It's a bit of a mouthful, but
I don't have comment on that.
Anyway, so it's based on your summing chain at your studio, and I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the plugin and what people could expect from it.
So the plugin was Z over at Pulsar Modular, Ziad, who owns the company and is the head designer. Unbelievably good person, now one of my best pals. Years ago, contacted me and saying, if you had a plugin you thought you could build, what would it be? And I said, well, I don't think you can do it, but I would love to see a way to create a stereo plugin that emulates summing. And he's like, I can do it. And I'm like, dude, stop being so cocky. Like, it's extremely difficult. I don't even know if anyone's ever even tried to approach it, because it doesn't mathematically seem to make sense, because it might work on one song, but it might not. But he was very confident. And so I really liked I have this original API from the Sausalito record plant. It was either the first 8 buckets or the first set, whatever it was, 8 bucket. And that was converted over to a sidecar. And I use it as my summing. It's 8 So 4 stems stereo. And I use the EQs, and it's extremely unique sounding API. And obviously it was used to record Rumors and Songs of the Key of Life and Huey Lewis and all these amazing specific albums that have very specific character to them. They said, how can you build something like that in a stereo plugin that has an EQ? And then I'm looking at my AT101, which is a Fairchild, that sound, which is essentially just a 2-light amp that I really like. And then combining all that, and then coming from the Bill Doug world, there was a lot of testing converters, which is very nerdy, but like being in a room and hearing how converters sound on a stereo source between this converter, this DAC versus this DAC, digital going to analog versus printing going back. Insane difference. Like you interpret a song so differently just off conversion. And so I'm like, oh, geez, what's something that happens when you're designing plugins? All these companies that are like, let's say, analyzing their files, or they're doing, strobe simulation impulse to get the character, whatever they're doing to build these plugins. It has to go through a converter to do that. There's no way to get an analog sound and hear it and process it through digital without hitting converter. They all have a character. And I have, because I'm crazy, 2 ridiculous high-end converters. One's a Josh Florian Latte, and one is a Lavery Avatar. And they're very, specific A to D kind of character-driven converters. I won't tell you what is what. I shouldn't have even said what was what, but I let the cat out of the bag. Everyone knows. They've been talking. There's like crazy 230,000 post ear sluts thing on this plugin. I couldn't believe the response, but they all figured out what it was. So the dogs are the converters. So essentially it's just 2 different converters that are capturing, that have very different characters implemented into the sound. And Z and I spent like a year, hundreds and hundreds of sound files of testing and failing constantly to get it right. And then we got it. And then I tried a different song and it failed again. So it took so long to get the process right. But then we reached a place where it was like a weird thing. I got an email one morning. He's like, I figured it out. And I'm like, okay. And it's like, you work on something like this. Think about like working on an album for a year with a producer or whatever, an artist. And they come and they go, I'm changing the lyrics. And you're like, why? Okay.
Like, can we be done with this already? Yeah.
Yeah, you've been there.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like where we were getting with the plugin, where I'm just like, all right. And I had this kind of clause with our agreement that I said, at any time I can back out if we don't nail it. And I was getting close. And Z knew that. I was like, it's getting a little, I don't think we're getting there. I mean, it's very good, but I won't put this out unless it's there, because I want to use it for real. I don't want to just say it's this. And he sent an email one morning and he said, I think I got it. And he sent it and it was perfect. I couldn't, but I sound like a infomercial, but I couldn't believe like how close it was. And I was going between the two, like my analog real mix and the plugin, to the point where it was faster than the analog, because I have to like let my Fairchild warm up, and I have to calibrate the console every morning before sessions. And like all of a sudden I'm using the plugin like 80, 90% of the time because it was there. And then there was, the cool thing about Pulsar Modular is Z is really good at listening to people's, suggestions and stuff. So there was a lot of people on the threads requesting things that we didn't plan or I didn't care we needed. And he, said, let's just put these things in the menu so people can have it. So there was other features that would help that. So let's say you're a mastering guy and you didn't want that amount of color. There's features where you can click a stair or whatever these special clicks, these features are, to enable or take away certain elements. So you're basically giving the user everything you need to be able to make it happen. But
That's awesome.
the biggest thing that was hard was, and I think you mentioned it when you tried it, was just getting that insert quality, because analog gear has a thing that just makes things sound in their own space.
Yeah.
And plugins can't do that. And well, they couldn't before, I guess.
Totally. Yeah. It was the first plugin that I tried in a long time where it's like, as soon as it was on, I was like, ooh, yeah, that's doing something really cool. And like,
I don't even know what it does. And it drives me crazy because I try to ask them, how were you able to code that? Like, because this is not impulse samples. This is 100% algorithm that he built with building blocks.
Yeah, so I was going to ask about that part of it. Like, what goes into? I know you didn't code it, but like, what goes into actually like modeling that gear?
This process took a while because I wanted to make sure that because I mix a ton of different types of music, that it was working on everything. Because there's stuff like summing mixers that works really good on this type of music, but not this, or same as plugins and stuff. So it just took a lot of prints, stems, different waveforms, different types of music, lots and lots of white noise and silly analyzing universe stuff, but just a lot of media, like hundreds of files where he can analyze everything. And he had as well API stuff with him, and he had access to stuff like that, so he could really look at how curves were really going exact. And same down to the converters, kind of speccing those out, making sure that that's pretty close.
Yeah.
The thing is, it's really well known the converter sounds are specific to doing certain things. At least for me, why I own two of them is because one does one thing different than the other. And I also felt like when you're in the middle of a mix and you're working and everything's great, and then you've been there where like things just start wadding up and you don't know how to go backwards because you don't want to start changing compression or reverbs because you're happy, but something just happened where it's just too clamped. Something just, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So I felt like, okay, thinking about like the way that Doug Sachs used to do stuff where like he would switch a clock or he would switch a line amp, like really simple moves, and it would open something up instantly. Like crazy, not aggressive changes. And so like toggling between those two converters in the middle of a problem like that can get solved pretty quickly. And what we found while we were developing was by doing that, we were able to like separate in a different way that I haven't seen in any other plugin, the quality control and how you analyzed like the specific files based around having two different converters and hearing it because they were so different. And it was more like front to center versus it was like the color or the compression or the EQ of a converter. It was really interesting. So yeah, just a lot of listening.
Yeah, I bet. So with the design of this plugin, like what was your, aside from like modeling your chain, like what did you think people were going to be using this to do? Like, was the idea just to have it as kind of a stereo bus thing, or like, you know, with the different converters in the mastering world, a lot of people talk about using converters for their clipping features to get louder mixes and that kind of stuff. Like, so were those the considerations that you had going into this and applications you thought people would use it for?
That's a good question. The big thing was I already knew that there was a couple really good clippers out there. And one of them was based around the Lavery Gold, which I don't really think about it. And I probably in analog universe hit the gold a little too hard sometimes. That was not implemented at all because I just said, let's just make sure this is clean. And it was designed to be a stereo processor. But what I found was more people were using on their buses than anything. And there was no wrong way to do it. We had a way where like the 2 times meant you're going through 2 faders, and the 8 times meant you're going through the sound of 8, what it would do separated.
Yeah, so for people who just don't know what you're talking about there, like on the actual plugin, there's the option to switch between a 2-channel subbing and 8-channel subbing mode.
Yeah, it'd be like 2 channels would be like a line amplifier for mastering, usually. But what people started doing was they would put the 2 channels on certain instruments, and I've always done this too, where I would put it on reverbs at the back end of reverbs, and 8 would just make things sound even more different on a reverb or a delay. It's really cool. But as far as like clipping and stuff, no, I didn't. It was essentially designed because in film work, because they require so much stems and stuff, that it's a pain to be an analog as much. And I liked my sound so much that I didn't know how to get around it. I had to figure out a way to make that happen. So that's why we built the plugin, so I could just like mix in the box, but still have the same sound. And that's mainly one of the main reasons why we built it, was for that. And then the fact that we were able to get it, I was like, okay, again, like sharing and giving it. It's like, I don't think we're in that world as much as it used to be. 15 years ago, there was a lot of people being like, don't share your secrets. It's so weird. No one mixes the same. I would never mix like Bill. As much as I want to be and do, I can't do it. He has his own ears. Mm-hmm. Even if I was doing everything. I used to see people come into his studio and say, set up like Bill. Use the same microphone, same reverb sends, everything, drum set, same session drummer. And the faders would come up. And the guy would come in, outside engineer, and it would sound horrible. Same setup as Bill. And it's just like, you'll never get that. There's that last 10% that you just can't get. And I think that's critical from learning from people, is to pick up everything you can and then add it. It's kind of like what the Beatles did. They loved everything. So many different types of music. And then they just made it their own. They just kind of created their own thing.
Yeah. So how do you use the plugin these days? Like, are you putting it on all your buses or just on the master? Like, what's your process?
I do. It's funny. I was just working on this film thing, and my friend Brian Carr, composer guy, was using it on his stems, and he put it on every stem before he sent it to me. And then I ended up using it on my stereo. I'm like, is that going to be too much? And it just made it even more different. At first, I thought with phase and how it was designed, because obviously there's a lot of wizardry going under the hood, things are wider and they have more depth. So what does that mean? Is it an MS thing? How does that work? Is it a frequency dependent technique? If you add 5 of them, are they going to start dulling out when you hit it mono? Like all these things we started testing in the beginning, and it kept working. The more you added it, it's like, no, that's okay. Just like analog, there's obviously problems, but it was doing what an analog system would do, essentially. And that's the thing. If you take 2 tracks and you flip the phase on one, they don't null. And I don't know a lot of digital plugins that don't do that, because there's always modulating stuff under the hood doing lots of stuff that we don't even know is happening.
Interesting.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Yeah.
It's one day I'll use it for stereo and that's it. And then another day, like I'll use it for just buses and reverbs. And then like yesterday I had a project where I didn't have it on the drums at all, but it was on every other bus and it wasn't on my stereo. Because it's interesting, because essentially if I'm in the analog world, I can only use it one way.
Of course.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So being able to use it completely different, because there are aspects of in the box that just kill analog no matter what. Like the sharpness of transients and like the fidelity of stuff. It might not sound as beautiful as analog, but it's just pure. And being able to mix those two, I could never do that. I can't mix half in the box and half analog the way that I have my setup. I mean, you can with inserts and stuff, but it's just a completely different process.
Mm-hmm.
This, it's like I can choose, I don't want to add this on my bass guitar, but I want this on vocals. I want this on drums and strings, stuff like that.
Very cool.
But I thought that's cool.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And then one thing you can do is, drums, it can be this converter, and bass guitar, it can be this converter, and they still lock in and they still sound special.
Yeah. So with the 2-channel versus 8-channel mode, is it like because obviously most people are going to be using this on stereo channels. So is it like an EQ saturation kind of thing that's going on under the hood there? Or obviously it's like emulating what it would be like if you ran 8 channels through a board, but if you're only working on a stereo track, like how does that work?
Well, I mean, any any piece of electronic is going to add or take away to the signal. Most of the time it hurts, no matter how high end it is. No matter like the quality control of, you know, how great that amplifier is, it's always going to hurt the signal. And 2 channels, believe it or not, will add a ton of character. Or not. The stereo into 2 channels is going to keep probably the lock of your image pretty tight. Your center, phantom center, and your left and right is going to be locked pretty good. The 8 channel, which in my opinion is what the hardware does, summing, it makes things a little wider and it separates each instrument very differently. And under the hood of this, there's transformers in the API and there's 2520 op amps. And the op amps on their own have extreme character color, which is why people like to use the EQs and stuff, because they all have that op amp in them. And by using them by themselves, I mean, if you wanted to just use the 450, which is just the EQ, you don't kind of step into the world of the electronics everywhere else. It's unneeded. It's just an EQ and in the signature sound of an API. But like there is quite a bit difference, and there's a couple clicks on the menu called Mod 1, Mod 2, and those essentially are like different sounding op amps, because getting really nerdy, it's like different sounding tubes. Analog is analog, and they all sound a little different, and sometimes today I like this sound, but tomorrow or on this track, it might not work. So yeah, that's why we have those features.
That's cool. Yeah, it's a great plugin. I definitely recommend people listening to this episode, go check it out. And I think there's a trial that you might be able to find on their website, and it's an awesome plugin. And man, I've been loving using it. So yeah, thanks for making this. It's been great.
It was interesting to say the least, because I really didn't think it was going to work, and the fact that it did work, it made me believe in digital audio even more, and to the point where I made myself want to just start experimenting on other options. So yeah, we are developing a couple new features,
nice
new plugins. I will not say what it is, but there is chatter online that is correct. And there should be some sort of chat more about it probably in the next 4 months or so. Once we get past that phase again, where I say, okay, this is it.
Nice.
Because with like the sidecar, I wasn't telling anyone. I wasn't telling my friends. I wasn't telling colleagues, because you can't say it until you know it's going to work. And even when it was working, I was like, I can't.
Yeah.
I can't say this, because if I say it and then I you're attached to it, so you think it's better. It's like you love your daughter because it's your daughter, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
Versus like someone being like, yeah, she's all right. You're like, Dad, that's my daughter. She's amazing. But like, of course, I'm going to say that. So like sending it off and getting people's opinions. I remember sending it to Pensato and Sammy, who's Dave's secondhand man. And I know Dave and Sammy would say, this is crap. What's happening? And I sent it to Ken, and I sent it to, a lot of other pals that I was like, these people will really tell me if this is not working or not. And it was all really, I think at first I didn't believe the feedback, because it was all so positive and like, hi-fi bros positive. But like what they were saying was everything I knew I needed to hear. Like it did this in the mix, or added this sound that I've never heard, or like, how was that like, instead of it just being like, that's amazing, they were literally saying, how can it separate so well a snare drum inside of stereo mix if you just put it on the stereo track? How does it do that? And I'm just like, it does that on the sidecar. So if I take stereo track for some reason, somehow going through a stereo 2-channel of this, going through my EQ, boosted at 50 and boosted at 10K, going into, my AT101, which is a point-to-point of a 670 Fairchild, not use compression and, conversion, there's a reason why there's something going on there.
It was doing what you expected
sluggishness.
it to do. Yeah, that's awesome. Man, Mark, this has been awesome. I've definitely loved learning more about your story and all the cool stuff you've been working on, and this plugin. It's been great. I don't want to take up too much
I
more.
think we went 2 hours.
Maybe, but
how long can we go? Let's do a record.
Well, I do have one last question for you, and I know we didn't get into too much of like your technical process, but at the end of the day, like for you, ultimately, what makes a great sounding mix?
I don't think it's as much. Oh, it's always going to be the song. I mean, I was listening to Kyle Lenning podcast yesterday, and he was talking about all the Randy Travis records that he did. And he was talking about like how he was always blessed to have the best players in the world in Nashville. And he said, you know, just because you have all these great players doesn't mean that it's going to always work, even if you have a great song. Sometimes putting the wrong players in the room for a song. He did something where it was some album where he hired A-list players, but they were the wrong players for the track. And he knew that, and then he ended up losing a ton of money, canceled the sessions, and then did it again, and it was perfect with different players. And you just don't know how much it goes into a great song. Now we're working in rooms by ourselves. You know what I mean? Like mixing, recording, producing. You're not going to the studio as much as you used to where you're hanging around people. My advice, what makes great music, is when you know that it's smothered with like love and passion and there's more than one person involved in it. Yeah. I don't know how to explain that because sometimes you don't know it, but like just I feel like we're missing that in music is like the community of involving multitude of players or I don't know. I mean, I feel like in music now, everyone's in their own rooms building it from scratch to the end. And it's not because the samples on the drums sound fake that it's emotionless, because we know that's not the case because there's billion records that are super successful with samples, that it's something else. And listening back to old records and stuff, it's about the players, it's about the song, it's about the person singing, not punching in every line or loop recording 56 times to get a comp of your vocal. I mean, it's just a lot of that came through in the music in the past, and I feel like now we're getting kind of away from that. So if I'm going and producing an album, I tend to leave more mistakes and stuff on purpose, because we're comping the life out of music, I think.
Yeah, that's great point to make.
But it's hard because like for you got a drum set behind you, you're producing stuff in one room, you got headphones on. How do you get around doing that? I mean, for me, like as a mixer, I try to find ways to be creative even while I'm in the box, which is why I have these tape machines and stuff. I have a good 2-track machine. I have a kind of mediocre, scummy 8-track machine. I have a really clunky cassette 4-track. And like being able to send stuff through that uniquely, it gives personality, but it's also like part of the fun. And maybe that some of that fun gets put into the craftsmanship, gets put into the music, and maybe you can hear that. Maybe the audience hears that. I don't know.
Yeah, that might be the answer,
Probably
right?
not.
It's like when people make food and they're like, "How's it taste so good?" It's like it was made with love, right? It's now this is made with fun. So yeah.
Well, think about it. It's like you're going to be in that room recording drums, and you hear a song, and you go, "I know I have to make it sound big, like a big A-list room, like East West Studio One or something." So you're going to have to implement samples to make that happen. And then you go, okay, everyone else has these same samples. How do I be different? Because you want it to be familiar, so you use similar sounding samples than everyone else or the records you love, but then you want it to be different. So how do you be different when you're recording drums in a small room? So you got to find unique ways to do that, like trigger your snare and then send it through a speaker into your hallway and then have that as a mono reverb dead center on the snare heads. I mean, no one else can get that sound of your hallway, and it will be there, and you mangle the crap out of that reverb too. Make it bright and harsh and so unique, because part of that sound of those old records, it could be 20 years old, but a lot of this stuff was chambers and very unique sounding approaches. Everyone had an EMT, 140 or a 250, but they processed it differently, completely with EQ, crapped out line amps, did stuff that was super unique, and then implemented that into the mix that made it unique. So instead of just slapping on the ambience of the snare that you've heard on everything, try something different like that.
Yeah, I love that. That's great advice, and I totally agree with you. You have to find like the magic of the room that you're in, or like whatever inspires you to mangle up the sound. And it's so true. Like I do a lot of reviews of students' mixes and stuff like that, and it's like I can always tell like, oh, this is the Logic stock drummer, you know what I mean? Like there's a very distinct sound with the snare of that kit, and it's like, okay, we gotta find something different, find something cool, right? And yeah, maybe sometimes it's just running it through different reverb or mangling it up with distortion or something like that. But yeah, there's definitely a magic to just getting creative with the sounds and doing unique things with
everyone has the same plugins. We all kind of have our own settings. We all watch each other's videos of how to steal their reverb settings and compression settings and stuff. But once you kind of get confidence in the way you're mixing, balance-wise, you want to start doing unique things. I mean, a little advice I can tell you and the audience, go on Reverb, and there are Reverb, literally, reverb.com. Go on reverb.com. There are reverb boxes that you can get for like $80 that are like back in the 90s were like the lowest, crappiest digital reverbs that had personality for days that sounds nothing like any plugin because they probably don't sound great, but they will when you use them sparingly in a mix. Don't use it on vocal if it's going to make the S's sound horrible and harsh. Use it on percussive stuff and be very independent. You can use that as an insert because even the smallest, my SSL little 4-channel thing has enough in and outs. I can easily do reverb sends on that. So anyone at home can do that. And these boxes, like Alesis Nanoverb, like $49 online on eBay. Very unique sounding stuff. Doesn't sound like plugins and can separate certain elements of your mix very differently. That makes just that little bit of extra difference of your personality. And it's fun. And you're printing it and recording it into the project. So then it's locked in tomorrow when you open it up. And if you want to fix it, you can just fix it with the hardware. But there's just ways that you can keep things efficient and unique. And there's stuff that, like, it doesn't have to be a Bricasti M7 or a Seventh Heaven reverb plugin. You go out of your way and start using stuff that's a little quirkier. Like I have this art reverb that I bought back in the 90s when I had my 4-track, and I still have it. And I still think you can get one for, it's got a little slider. That's all I'll say. It's an ART, A-R-T, from the 90s, black face, pink writing, and a slider. And it's a reverb box. And it's got one of the best snare reverbs in history. And I will never tell people what it is unless they email me, which don't email me. But my point is, I still use it. It's below my rack right now. It's on my insert. It's in my template. And it's never gets changed. It's just one setting, and it's magic. And that thing, I think you can get for free anywhere. They're so cheap. So very unique.
Very cool, man. Dude, this has been great. I've really enjoyed this conversation. It's been a lot of fun. I think you shared a lot of really good stuff that people can take and implement into their careers and into their studio work as well. So again, Marc, thank you for taking the time to do this. If people want to learn more about you, or maybe even work with you, or maybe check out your plugin, what are the best ways for them to do that?
Oh, golly. I mean, you can go, I'm not on social media, so I don't even know how that stuff works anymore. You can find me at my website, marcdanielnelson.com. Email me the same through the site. The plugin's Pulsar Modular. It's, I think, the main right on the top front page. And yeah, reach out. I'm always willing to help. I probably get, 15, 20 emails a week that I'm consistently chatting with people. Just, young people that are trying to get ideas and influence and just second opinions. Sometimes you just need someone to just take a quick peek at something. If I have time, I'll listen and I'll give you an idea of whatever. Why not? It's like, that's all I wanted when I was young and trying to get people to listen to my stuff and tell me it was crap. I really wanted people to tell me my stuff was crap because it would make me better knowing that I could fix it and how to fix it. You know what I mean? Like, okay, why is it crap? It's just harsh. The drums sound squashed. Okay, now I know and I trust you. So how do I go back and fix that? And then I'm going to go spend 6 months trying to fix it. And I'll come back with a new mix maybe and say, what, is this better? And sometimes it was better and sometimes it wasn't.
Yeah.
But
love it.
Like, that's important.
Of course. Yeah. You need to have someone that you can trust to give you that feedback as opposed to like your family and friends who are just gonna be like, that sounds great. You know, like, and like, does it
music.
Really? Like, yeah.
It's hard though, because like I still second guess myself and I'm sending mixes for fun. The people that I know are terrible mixers, they would never do it, but they'll know if it's harsh or they'll know that like there's too much bass. And I like to push the envelope of that. Like I like to get as bright as I can and as much low end as I can. And sometimes I'm going over the threshold of like, this is a little dangerous, but that's another thing of me learning over time is like being a little dangerous is way more inviting when you're listening to music than just the flat, boring sounding mix. A little too much bass. That's why hip hop is so great because it's tons of low end, tons of top end to the point where it's fatiguing. That's what gets you going. It's energy. So like, you don't always have to be perfect. And sometimes just a little teetering over, it's kind of like tuning the voice. Don't toot it so hard. It's okay to leave things a little off. Keeps people going, what's happening there? It's good. That's the, you know, you don't want to just turn it off. I mean, AI has become such a boring thing now, or it's become perfect. Let's get back to like putting a fault in certain things. It's human.
That's awesome. That's great advice. Great way to wrap it up, man.
That's great advice, Marty.
Well, again, dude, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Mike.
Of course.
I appreciate it.
So that was my interview with Marc Daniel Nelson, and I really enjoyed that episode. I thought it was great to learn more about what went into making his plugin and all of the cool little details that go into making the sound of that plugin and go into ultimately his hardware chain that he uses. I also thought it was great to learn more about his career path and all of the people that he encountered along the way. And it was kind of nice and refreshing to hear stories of nice people in this industry that are wanting to help people out. It's definitely something that you could tell has rubbed off on Marc. I think that he just shared a lot of great tips there in terms of like being a better person and knowing how to be someone that people want to be around in the room. And I think that is a major part of networking in this industry and growing your career and being surrounded by other people that are fun, people that you want to be around with, right? So yeah, I just thought it was really cool to hear Marc share his story about that too. And lastly, I thought it was really cool to hear Marc talk about how, even to this day, after all the amazing records that he's done, he still has those moments where he has self-doubt about his mixes and how he likes to rely on other engineers to get feedback on his tracks to make sure that hasn't gone too far with low end or top end, that kind of stuff. And obviously the advice he's getting has been great because, again, if you listen to his recordings, they sound awesome. His mixes sound great. And that's actually something that's really important. Having someone in your corner who you can reach out to get feedback, and not just feedback, but actionable steps to improve the quality of your tracks, that's really, really important. And in fact, that's actually something that I offer my students inside of my Amplitude coaching program. So if you're someone working on a track or a new project, a new record, and you're feeling stuck with the songs, if you're not sure what to be doing, if you're not sure if you got too much low end or too much top end or mid range, or maybe you're not sure if you're recording your tracks properly and you want some actionable feedback on how to improve the quality of your tracks, that is exactly what I offer inside of Amplitude. You're going to get one-on-one personalized advice to make sure that you can take your songs to that next level and that you can actually achieve the sound that you hear in your head and get it to come out of your speakers. So if you're interested in learning more about Amplitude, make sure to visit MasterYourMix.com/Amplitude, and you can find all the details about the program there. And then I'd love to hop on a call with you. I'd love to learn more about your goals and the project that you're working on to get a sense of what's currently working for you, what you're struggling with, and to see how I can help you. And if it seems like you'd be a good fit and that I can truly help you, then I'd love to invite you into the program and work with you to make your tracks come to life, get them done, so you can ultimately release those songs and share them with the world and be excited about it. So once again, if you're interested in learning more, make sure to visit MasterYourMix.com/Amplitude, and you can find all the details there. And with that said, we've reached the end of this episode. Thank you so much for sticking around to the end. I can't wait to chat with you next one. We'll talk soon. Take care. Thanks for listening to the Master Your Mix podcast. Please make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast app and leave a review. If you have any questions or comments for the podcast, send an email to questions@masteryourmix.com. And for more information on how to create pro recordings from your home studio, visit masteryourmix.com.